The day my mother's doctor used the word irreversible, I was standing in a hospital corridor, holding a paper cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and cafeteria food, and everything around me went slightly sideways, the way it does when your body understands something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. My mother had Alzheimer's. Early stage, the doctor said, as if the word early was supposed to be a comfort. It wasn't. I drove home that evening and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. Not because I was processing grief, though I was, but because something the doctor had said kept repeating in my head. Something about the paperwork. Something about a power of attorney already being on file. Already. A document I had never signed. A name I did not recognize as my own. I went inside, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and called my brother Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, which was unusual. Marcus never picked up on the second ring. And the first thing he said wasn't, "How is she?" It was, "I figured you'd call." I held the phone away from my face for a second and looked at it. The way you look at something when you need a moment before you respond. He already knew I had been to the hospital. He already knew what the doctor had said. And he wasn't surprised, not even slightly. That was the moment I understood that what I was walking into had nothing to do with the diagnosis. The diagnosis was just the door. What was behind it had been building for years. And the people I trusted most had been keeping it locked. Over the next 11 months, everything I thought I knew about my family came apart. My mother, the woman who raised me, who made Sunday dinners from scratch, who never once raised her voice at me in 52 years, had been carrying a secret so heavy it had bent the shape of our entire family without any of us ever seeing the weight. My brother had found out, and instead of protecting her the way a son should, he had used what he knew to protect himself. What I am about to tell you is not a comfortable story. It does not end with everyone learning their lesson and sitting down together at Thanksgiving. But it is true. And for women who have ever sat in a hospital corridor, cup of coffee going cold in their hand, wondering what they are walking back into, this one is for you. There are things you expect when a parent gets sick. You expect the logistics, the appointments, the medication schedules, the conversations about assisted living that nobody wants to start, but somebody has to. You expect grief, which arrives in waves and on its own schedule, not yours. You expect to feel helpless in the face of something you cannot fix. What you do not expect is to discover, while sorting through your mother's affairs, that her financial life has been quietly restructured without your knowledge. You do not expect to find a name on a bank statement, a name attached to regular monthly transfers, going back 15 years, that belongs to no one in your family. And you do not expect that when you bring that name to your brother, the man who has always positioned himself as the responsible one, the organized one, the one who keeps things together, you do not expect him to go very quiet and very still and to say almost nothing at all. I want to tell you what that name turned out to mean. I want to tell you what was happening inside that house, inside that family, while the rest of us were living our lives and assuming everything was fine. Because the answer is not what I expected. It is not a story about simple greed, though greed is certainly part of it. It is a story about a woman who made a decision before her children were born, a decision made under pressure, in a different era, in a different world, and who spent the rest of her life quietly carrying the consequences of it, alone, in a way no one around her ever fully understood. And it is a story about what happens when a secret outlives the ability of the person keeping it to keep it any longer. And it is a story about what family actually means when the version of it you have been living turns out to be incomplete. I spent months asking myself how my mother could have hidden something this large from me. I spent months being angry. And then I spent a long time learning to understand. Not agree, just understand. Because by the time I had all the pieces, by the time I could see the whole shape of what had actually happened, I realized that my mother had not been hiding from me. She had been protecting a life that she was terrified of losing again. And my brother had taken that fear and used it like a tool. Stay with me, because this story goes to places I did not see coming. And I don't think you will either. My mother, Dorothy Cole, was born in 1950 in a small town outside Macon, Georgia. She was the third of 5 children, raised by parents who worked hard and asked few questions of life because life, in their experience, rarely answered kindly. The house she grew up in had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a kitchen where her mother stood most of the day, and the expectation in that house, unspoken, the way the most binding expectations always are, was that you did not complain, You did not make demands, and you did not bring trouble to the door. That was not cruelty. That was survival. That was a generation of black women in the American South who had learned, through long experience, that certain kinds of visibility came at a cost. My mother absorbed that lesson so completely that by the time she was a grown woman, it had become indistinguishable from her own nature. She did not keep things to herself because she was secretive. She kept things to herself because that was simply what capable women did. Dorothy was sharp, the kind of sharp that in a different generation, a different world, would have taken her somewhere remarkable. She finished high school with honors, moved to Atlanta at 19, and got a job at an insurance firm where she worked for 31 years and eventually became a department head. She did not do this by accident. She did it by showing up on time, staying late, and never, not once in my memory, complaining about how difficult any of it was. Complaining was not in her vocabulary. Endurance was. She married my father in 1974. Gordon Cole was a quiet man with a loud laugh, a man who fixed things and didn't say much about his feelings but showed them in other ways. In the way he filled up my mother's car with gas on Sunday nights, so she didn't have to stop in the mornings. In the way he sat in the front row of every school play, every recital, every graduation that any of his children ever had. They were not a demonstrative couple by any modern standard. But in a room together, they had a gravity. You could feel it. Something settled and certain between them that you didn't need to announce. My brother Marcus came first, in 1975. I came 2 years later. And for as long as I can remember, the four of us were a unit, contained, functional, and deeply familiar to one another. I want to be honest about what that family felt like from the inside, because I think it matters to what comes later. We were not a family that talked about hard things directly. We talked around them, or we waited until they resolved themselves, or we simply agreed without discussion that some subjects belonged to a room no one would enter. My parents had a solid marriage. I believe that completely, but it was a marriage built on the architecture of their generation. You handled what was yours to handle, you kept the household running, and you trusted the person beside you to be doing the same. That kind of trust does not require full disclosure. And in many cases, for many years, it works. The gap it leaves, though, is real. And what moves into a gap is not always something you would have chosen. My father died in 2009. A heart attack, sudden and without warning, on a Tuesday afternoon in his own kitchen. It broke my mother in a way she never fully showed and never fully healed from. In the years after his death, she pulled herself together the way she always had, with routine, with purpose, with the kind of quiet discipline that had gotten her through every hard thing in her life. She stayed in the house they had shared on Cascade Road. She kept her garden. She called me every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon, without fail, for years. She never said she was lonely, though I believe she was. She was not a woman who asked for help. That was simply not how she had been built. And I, living my life 3 hours away, calling on Sundays, telling myself that consistency was the same as closeness. I let her be that woman without ever asking whether she needed to be something else. Marcus moved back to Atlanta around 2011, ostensibly to be closer to her, which at the time seemed like the responsible, generous thing for a son to do. He had been through a difficult divorce, a job transition, a period of his life that had not gone the way he planned. I was living in Charlotte then, managing my own career, my own family. I was grateful Marcus was nearby. I told him that, and I meant it. I had no reason, in those years, to look more closely at what being nearby actually meant. I trusted my brother. We had grown up in the same house, been shaped by the same parents, shared the same understanding of what family owed to itself. I called my mother on Sundays and she sounded like herself. That was enough for me. I was wrong to let it be. The first sign, I cannot say I missed it entirely. Something registered, and then I set it down. Around 2018, my mother mentioned, almost in passing, that she had changed banks. Not her main account, she said, just a small one. She was vague about it in a way that was slightly unlike her, and then she changed the subject, and I let her, because I was in the middle of something at work and I told myself I would ask about it later. I never did. A year after that, she mentioned Marcus was helping her with some paperwork, something to do with the house, something to do with accounts. I assumed estate planning. Sensible, responsible estate planning. I was glad someone was handling it. I thanked Marcus the next time I saw him. He said it was nothing, that it was just what you do. He smiled when he said it. And I believed him, Because I needed to believe that the people I loved were exactly who I had always thought they were. Because when you are in your late 40s and your mother is healthy and your family is intact, you do not go looking for problems that haven't announced themselves. You just live, and you trust, and you assume the door is locked because it never occurred to you that anyone would try it. The diagnosis came in March of last year. My mother had been having what she called fuzzy days for about 6 months, moments where she lost a word mid-sentence, where she repeated a question she had asked 10 minutes before. I had noticed it on phone calls. I told myself it was fatigue. She was 74 years old and had been alone a long time. Tired made sense. But the Sunday calls had started running shorter, and one afternoon she told me about something that had happened at church, a conversation with a woman she liked, and then told me the exact same story again 12 minutes later with the same details, the same laugh at the same moment. As though she had no idea, she was repeating herself. I made an appointment with her doctor and drove to Atlanta the following weekend. The neurologist was calm and thorough and spoke to my mother with a gentleness I was grateful for. The diagnosis was early-stage Alzheimer's. Manageable, for now. There were medications, a care plan to consider. And then he mentioned, gently, as part of the standard process, that given the diagnosis, it would be important to confirm that appropriate legal documents were in place. A power of attorney, for when the time came that she could no longer make certain decisions herself. He asked if the family had that covered. My mother looked at her hands, and the doctor said that according to the records he had been given, a durable power of attorney had been filed 18 months prior, naming my brother Marcus as sole agent. I looked at my mother. She did not look at me. That is the moment I come back to, again and again. Not the diagnosis, not the legal document, her hands in her lap, the particular angle of her head, the fact that she already knew this conversation was coming, not the Alzheimer's, but this moment where I would find out. And she had not warned me. She had not said a word. I drove to my mother's house that afternoon and asked Marcus to meet me there. He arrived 30 minutes after I did and came in with the energy of someone who has rehearsed being relaxed, a little too easy, a little too unbothered. I asked him when the power of attorney had been filed. He told me. I asked why I hadn't been informed. He said our mother had wanted it handled quietly, that she didn't want to make it a whole thing, that she had asked him specifically to keep it simple. And there it was, the first redirection, the first folding of our mother's wishes around his own actions like a blanket over something he didn't want examined. I did not push that night, but I started paying attention in a way I had not before. What followed was 6 weeks of going through documents, account statements, property records, correspondence, the kind of accounting that no one expects to be doing on their childhood home's kitchen table. I want you to understand what that process actually feels like, because it is not like anything else. You are sitting in a house you know by heart, the smell of it, the creak of the third step on the staircase, the particular angle of afternoon light through the kitchen window, and you are reading through the financial life of the woman who raised you as though she is a stranger whose records have been handed to you for audit. Every statement is a question. Every transfer is a timeline. Every account you didn't know existed is a room you are entering for the first time in a house you thought you knew completely. It is not grief exactly. It is something closer to vertigo. The floor is still there. You just can no longer be certain it will hold. And buried in the paperwork, repeated across statements from 3 separate accounts spanning 15 years, was a name. Elaine Patterson. Monthly transfers. Regular, consistent, never missed. Not a business. Not a charity. A person. And no one in my family carried that name. I had never heard it in my life. I asked my mother about Elaine Patterson on a Thursday evening in May. I had planned what I would say, thought through every version of what the answer might be, a distant relative, an old friend, someone she had been quietly helping through a hard time. I was not prepared for what actually happened. My mother looked at me for a long time. And then, very slowly, the composure that had been the defining feature of her entire life came apart in a way I had never witnessed. She did not cry, not at first. She looked at the table, at her hands, and she said, very quietly, I was 19 years old, and they told me I had no choice. She had a daughter before she married my father. A daughter born in the spring of 1970, given up for adoption under pressure from her own family, never spoken of again. Until 2010, when Elaine Patterson found her. I could not speak. I sat at that table, and I could not speak. And my mother told me the rest. how Elaine had sent a letter through an adoption registry, how they had met for the first time at a coffee shop in Atlanta, how she had known within 20 minutes that this was her daughter, how she had kept it from my father because she could never find the moment to begin the conversation, how he had died before the moment came, and how she had then decided, in her grief and her guilt, that she would not disrupt what remained of the family she had built by introducing the family she had buried. She sent Elaine money every month because she could not give her what she had actually needed, which was a mother who had not disappeared. She thought she was making it right, in the only way she had left. I want to stay here for a moment, because I think it is important. My mother was 19 years old in 1970 in Georgia. She was unmarried and pregnant, and her family, the same family that had taught her not to bring trouble to the door, told her what was going to happen. There was no negotiation. There was no moment where her own wishes were the primary consideration. She did what she was told, and then she built a life, and she carried that first chapter of it in absolute silence for 40 years. When I think about the discipline that required, not just the keeping of the secret, but the daily decision to go on living as though a part of herself did not exist, I find it almost impossible to hold. And I find it equally impossible to be straightforwardly angry at her for it. What she did was not fair to Elaine. It was not fair to me, but it was the decision of a very young woman who had been given no good options and who spent the rest of her life trying, in the only way she could access, to make it mean something. And Marcus had known since 2013. He had found a letter in her house, opened it, and confronted her. She had told him everything, and he had not told me. What he had done, and I want you to sit with this, was use that secret as leverage. Not overtly, not in the way of someone who announces their intentions. Slowly, methodically, in the way of someone who understands that a secret is only as powerful as the person carrying it is afraid. Every time my mother resisted something he proposed, a transfer, a document, a change to an account, Marcus reminded her of what disclosure would cost. He never used the word blackmail, but that is what it was. And my mother, terrified of losing the one child she had already lost twice, had let him. For 11 years, she had let him. I did not confront Marcus that night. I went home, and I sat with what my mother had told me, and I did not sleep. There are things you process quickly because they demand it, emergencies, logistics, decisions that have to be made by morning. And then there are things that require you to simply be inside them for a while before you can think clearly. This was the second kind. I had just learned that my mother had a daughter I had never known existed, that my brother had known for 11 years, that the family I had believed in for my entire adult life had a shape I had not been seeing, a shape defined not only by what we shared, but by what we kept from each other. I needed to understand that before I could figure out what to do with it. I retained a lawyer 2 weeks later, not to punish Marcus, not yet, but to understand the legal reality of what had been done. The attorney was direct. If the power of attorney had been obtained through coercion, or if financial transfers had been made under circumstances where my mother's full consent was undermined by fear, there were avenues to pursue. There were questions that needed answering about whether her mental capacity at the time of signing was consistent with full legal agency. That process is still ongoing. I am not going to tell you it has been straightforward, because it has not. Family legal disputes rarely are. What I will tell you is that sitting across from a lawyer and describing your brother's behavior in clinical, factual terms, separating it from everything you grew up believing about him, is one of the stranger experiences a person can have. You are not lying. You are not exaggerating. You are simply telling the truth in a room where the truth has consequences, and the gap between that room and every family dinner you have ever sat through together is almost too wide to comprehend. But I will tell you that the moment I hired that lawyer was the moment I stopped being a daughter navigating a family situation and started being an adult protecting a woman who had spent her entire life protecting everyone but herself. Marcus and I have not spoken since June. That silence has its own weight. I will not pretend it doesn't. He is my brother. We grew up in the same house. There are decades of dinners and arguments and shared history between us, and none of that disappears because of what I know now. But there is something I have come to understand about betrayal inside a family. It is not the act itself that does the deepest damage. It is the discovery of how long it was possible to be deceived by someone who knew you well. Because that is what tells you something about who you actually are to that person. Not who you believed yourself to be, who you were in their calculation of the world. Marcus did not protect our mother. He protected his access to what she had. And there is a grief in that which does not have a clean name. What I want women watching this to hear, particularly women in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, who may be moving through something similar right now, is that the instinct to keep the peace, to hold the family together, to not be the one who makes things worse, is not a weakness. It is something you were taught. You were taught that the family unit is worth protecting at significant personal cost. You were taught that bringing things into the open creates damage, when often the damage is already there. It is just invisible until someone turns the light on. My mother spent 4 decades protecting a secret that she believed would destroy her family if it came out. What actually came close to destroying it was not the secret itself. It was the person who weaponized it. I reached out to Elaine Patterson in August. I want to be careful about what I say here, because this part of the story belongs as much to her as it does to me. What I will tell you is that she is 55 years old. She lives outside Savannah. She has children of her own. And when I called her and told her who I was, she was quiet for a long time before she spoke. We have met twice. The conversations have not been easy. They have been honest in the way that only conversations between people who have nothing left to perform for each other can be. We are 2 women who share a mother and do not share a childhood, and the space between those 2 facts is enormous and strange and does not have a map. I do not know yet what we are to each other. I do not know if family is the right word, or whether it will ever feel like the right one. But I know that she existed, that she deserved to exist within our knowledge of ourselves, and that my mother knew this and lived with the impossibility of it for decades. That is not something I have finished understanding, but I have started. My mother is still living in the house on Cascade Road. She has a caregiver who comes 3 days a week. On good days, she does her crossword and calls me in the afternoon and sounds like the woman who raised me. On harder days, she looks for my father, and the caregiver tells her he will be back soon, and she accepts that with the graciousness she has always had. A graciousness, I now understand, that was earned through years of holding more than anyone knew. I visit as often as I can, and one Sunday in October, we sat on the back porch, and she held my hand, and she said, "I should have told you. I thought I was keeping you safe." And I told her what I believed, which was that she was doing the best she knew how with what she had been given. I still believe that. I hold that and what happened at the same time. They are both true. That is the thing no one tells you about loving someone who has hurt you by omission, that the love and the hurt are not opposites. They coexist. They have to, because the person is not reducible to the secret, any more than the secret is reducible to a single decision made in a single year that happened to shape everything that came after. That is the thing about families, the real version of them, not the version we perform at holidays. The real version is full of decisions made in fear, secrets held out of love, silences that accumulate over years until they have a weight no single person can lift alone. And sometimes it takes a crisis, a diagnosis, a document, a name on a bank statement that doesn't belong to anyone you know, to bring the actual structure of what has been built into view. Not because the crisis created the problem, but because it removed the conditions that had allowed everyone to keep looking away. My mother's diagnosis did not break my family. My family had fractures I could not see. The diagnosis turned on the lights. I said at the beginning of this that I sat in a hospital corridor holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. That everything went slightly sideways when the doctor used the word irreversible. What I know now, that I did not know then, is that the thing that was irreversible was not only my mother's illness. It was my ability to keep not knowing. Once you find a name on a bank statement that belongs to no one you have ever met. Once your mother says, "They told me I had no choice," and her composure comes apart for the first time in your memory. Once you see clearly how a person you loved used a woman's fear against her. You cannot go back to the shape of things as they were. You carry what you know, and then you decide, deliberately, what you are going to build with it. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, not necessarily the specific details, but the feeling of a family that looks whole from the outside and is carrying something heavy from the inside, I want you to leave a comment below. Tell me, is there something your family has never directly addressed? A conversation that keeps not happening? Something you know that everyone has agreed, without ever saying so out loud, not to say? Because I think a lot of us are living inside that agreement right now. And there is something worth doing in the act of naming it, even quietly, even just in a comment section. You don't have to say everything. Just say something true. This channel exists because these stories matter. Not the dramatic version of them, the real version. The quiet, complicated, decades-long version that doesn't have a clear villain or a clean ending, but does have something worth paying attention to. If this one stayed with you, please subscribe and make sure you hit the notification bell, because next week I am going to be addressing something I get asked about more than almost anything else. What do you do when you are the one who has to decide how much of the truth to tell, and to whom? That conversation is more complicated than most people expect, and I think you are going to want to be here for it.